Good evening. Welcome to our Lompoc City Council meeting. This is Tuesday, May 2nd, 2017. I'd like to remind everyone to silence their cell phones. And we are not returning from closed session for a change. We have not had closed session tonight, so I will not ask the city attorney to report. Madam Clerk, we have roll call, please.
Councilmember Vega?
Here.
Councilmember Starbuck?
Present.
Councilmember Osborne?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem James Mosby?
Present.
Mayor Bob Lingle?
Here. Please rise for the invocation by Pastor Bernie Fetterman.
Let us pray. Dear gracious and amazing God, we pause and stand before you, with each one of us in our own way expressing gratitude for your goodness and your kindness to us, your ongoing provisions, your grace, your goodness, and being there simply when we call upon your name for help. One of the greatest blessings you provided us with are the people in our families, our friends, our neighbors, and the people in this room. May we never take for granted each day that you allow us to live, or each person that you bring into our lives. As a city, we face many challenges, and this is nothing new. From serving our people, to protecting our people, to dealing with budgets, and not always having all that we hope for. But we still trust in you, and we still ask for your wisdom, your creative ideas provided for our city leaders and all our employees. Give our leaders and our staff the wisdom to know what is right and the courage to do it. I ask you to provide resources and favor for our local businesses of our community, and may they not only succeed, but may they flourish. I'm honored in this place and privileged to call you God, and mindful of your divinity and our humanity. You are the creator, we are the creature. You are the shepherd, and we are the sheep of your hand. This reminds us that we are imperfect people, and you are a perfect God. You are all wise, and we are not. And because of our frailty, we will hurt others around us and be hurt. Help us to live with grace, and when we hurt each other, to seek out their forgiveness and yours as well. And when we are hurt, to choose not to be offended or to carry a grudge. Watch over our community. Be with those who protect us and who serve us. May your hand of grace and peace be upon our mayor, our city council members, our city manager, our city staff, our leaders, and our employees. And may your grace be shed upon our community. It is with faith, hope, and love that I pray this night. In your mighty name, amen.
Amen. Please remain standing and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Have a seat. Okay, presentations elsewhere. On April 20th, I was very fortunate to attend the Public Safety Awards dinner, and we presented proclamations to firefighter Chris Martinez and police officer Lucas Signorelli. This was in addition to multitudes of other public safety officials throughout our county. It was a really nice evening to see all these fine young men and women honored. Also on, April 26th, Councilmember Dirk Starbuck presented a proclamation to James Sloan in honor of his years of service to the Lompoc Cemetery District. And it was a well-deserved proclamation. Okay, presentations. I have a presentation to present this evening to Building and Safety, in honoring Building and Safety Month. You guys gonna come up? Okay. I think this could be one of the longest proclamations I've had, so I've had them printed in big letters. Anyway, this is a proclamation honoring Building and Safety Month. Whereas the City of Lompoc is committed to recognizing that our growth and strength depends on the safety and economic value of the homes, buildings, and infrastructure that serve our citizens both in everyday life and in times of natural disaster. And whereas our confidence in the structural integrity of these buildings that make up our community is achieved through the devotion and vigilant guidance, building safety and fire prevention officials, architects, engineers, builders, tradespeople, design professionals, laborers, and others in the construction industry who work year-round to ensure that safe construction of buildings. And whereas these guardians are dedicated members of the International Code Council of the U.S.-based organization that brings together local, state, and federal officials that are experts in the built environment to create and implement the highest quality codes to protect us in the buildings where we live, learn, work, worship, and play. And whereas our nation benefits economically and technologically by using the international codes that are developed by the National Voluntary Consensus Codes and Standards Developing Organization, our government is able to avoid the high cost and complexity of developing and maintaining these codes, which are the most widely adopted building safety and fire prevention codes in the nation. These modern building codes include safeguards to protect the public from natural disaster such as hurricanes, snowstorms, tornadoes, wildland fires, floods, earthquakes. And whereas Building Safety Month is sponsored by the International Code Council to remind the public about the critical role our community's largely unknown guardians of public safety, our local code enforcement officials, who assure us of safe, efficient, livable buildings that are essential to keep America great. And whereas code officials, partners in community safety and economic growth, are the theme of Building Safety Month 2017. We encourage all Americans to raise awareness of the importance of building safe and resilient construction, fire prevention, disaster mitigation, and new technologies in the construction industry. Building Safety Month encourages appropriate steps everyone can take to ensure that the places where we live, learn, work, worship, and play are safe and recognizes the countless lives that have been saved due to the implementation of the safety codes by local and state agencies. And whereas each year, in observance of Building Safety Month, Americans are asked to consider the commitment to improve building safety and economic investment at home and in the community, and to acknowledge the essential service provided to all of us by local, state, building departments, fire prevention bureaus, and federal agencies in the protecting our lives and property. Now, therefore, I, Bob Lingle, Mayor, City of Lompoc, California, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2017 as Building Safety Month. Accordingly, I encourage all citizens to join us in their communities in participation of Building Safety Month activities. Congratulations. You guys want to say a couple words? There you go. Want to say a couple things?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor, members, audience. Thank you very much for the proclamation. I understand this is our inaugural event, and the first time that we've had it in the past. I don't know that we've done something like this before, but thank you very much for taking the time and doing it for us. We have a couple of events that we have prepared for this. One of them is called the Ready, Set, Go. It's posted on our website, and it's this Saturday at Home Depot from 10 to 2. So we're going to have some handouts, things for people to read, people there to ask questions of us, and we'll be able to respond to them as well. The Central Coast chapter, along with all the other jurisdictions, we're also preparing a presentation at the Cal Poly for students in architecture and engineering as far as why things are important in building and recognition of all the codes as well. So hopefully it's going to go well, and we expect it to go well. So again, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Bunch of busy people in that department. City Manager's report.
Nothing at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Public comment. This is your opportunity to speak to us for up to 3 minutes on anything on the consent calendar. Okay, seeing no one rise, we're going to close public comment, and we'll bring it back to the council. The consent calendar consists of things that are generally considered routine and will be passed with one motion and one vote unless a council member chooses to pull an item. Does any council member wish to pull an item? Seeing no one, I would entertain a motion to accept.
I'll go ahead and move we accept the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Let's vote. And that passes 5-0. Oral communication. This is your opportunity to speak to us for 3 minutes on anything before the council.
Good evening, Mayor Lingle, council members. My name is Atul Patel, and I'd like to discuss a few things. I know you guys are going into your budget hearings for, I believe, fiscal year 2017-2019, and I wanted to bring to your attention about, I believe, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, we had brought up the fact of the Hilton Garden Inn opening in the next, hopefully, 60 days or so, and just wanted to bring up regarding the bed tax revenue that will derive from that entity. We're estimating about $500,000 on the low side, and we just wanted to bring to your attention that I would really like to see those funds, because you haven't had those funds in 30 years, to go towards the police and fire for their infrastructure. And I was just doing simple math. If you borrow money at 3% or 4%, I don't know what the city gets its rates at, but that could give them up to $5 million, between $5 and $7 million per each department to do with, in obviously an approved manner, but to be able to start gearing up. And this is one of those revenue streams that will continue for the next 20, 30, 40, as long as a hotel is standing and operating as that type of entity. So I just want you guys to, I've seen it on the agendas saying it's going to come up for discussion, it's going to come up for discussion. But now I think, since you are doing the budget, I'd like to see it come up for a real discussion. And hopefully those funds can be allocated to the police and fire department, because I think living in this community for 36 years now, they are in dire need of some upgrades, and especially to service our city as we grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patel. Anyone else? Hank?
Mayor and City Council members, I have a story to tell. On April the 15th, this past Saturday, I was teaching a class at Ellen Hancock on people skills. And just before the class started, a young man walked into the classroom, and he had a shaved head, and he had a netting on his head. And under the netting, there were metal discs with wires connected to a box. I didn't say anything. The young gentleman sat down. There was another gentleman, an older gentleman, that sat beside this young gentleman, and they were talking and stuff. And at the last council meeting, the older gentleman came up to me and said, "You know, the one that was in the class, he says, that young man has inoperable brain tumor and was told he only has a year and a half to live. And he's here and he wants to be a biologist, and he wants to learn, even under those circumstances." And this older gentleman said to me at the last council meeting, he said, "I talked to this young man, 21 years old, and I asked this young man if he's ever ridden in a police car." And the young man said, "No." And he said, "How would you like to ride in a police car with the sirens and everything?" And the young man said, "Yes, I would." And the older gentleman said, "Well, here's my phone number and business card, and call me." I saw this older gentleman Sunday at the coffee shop, And I asked, I says, how is it coming? He says, fine. But he hadn't heard from this young man. And he asked me, how can I get in touch with this young man? I says, well, you'll have to call the register, I think. And he called the register, and he got his phone number and called him. And on May the 11th, this young man with the brain tumor and so forth would be riding in a police car with a young police officer. The older gentleman is in this room tonight. Mr. Pat Walsh, Chief of Police, the City of Lompoc. This is character of our police department, and especially with our chief. And I wanted the City Council to know that competence is important, but character also is important, what he did for that young man. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Can anyone top that? Okay. Well, thank you very much. And seeing no one rise, we're going to close oral communication. We're going to go to item number 6, which is appointments. We have several openings on our Economic Development Committee. And for those of you out there and those of you viewing at home, we still need more people for our Economic Development Committee. So it's too late to get on the agenda for tonight, but come into City Hall tomorrow or any day and fill out your application. So we have actually 6 openings. We have 2 at-large positions, terms ending February of 2018, 2 associate positions, term ending February of 2018, and 2 at-large positions, term ending December of 2018. These 2, December of 2018, will be appointees of me and Councilmember Vega. So why don't we start with the Councilmember Vega first, if you would like to nominate one of the individuals on the list there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'm going to go ahead and I think he'd be a good addition to the EDC. Mr. George Bedford, I'd like to nominate him for the position here in my appointment.
Okay. Do we have a second for that?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any discussion? Let's vote. And that passes 5-0. For my nominee, I'd like to nominate Clayton Turner to the at-large position ending December 2018. And with that, I'll need a second.
I'll give you a second.
Okay, any discussion? Let's vote on that. And that passes 5-0. Okay, so we have one additional applicant, that is Christina Mercer. And I will nominate her to fill one of the at-large positions ending February of 2018.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? And let's vote on that. Okay, that passes 5-0. So again, just for anyone in the audience or anyone at home, we still have 3 openings on our Economic Development Committee, and we'd love to have you apply. Okay, we're going to move on to new business. Item number 7, authorize agreement to purchase property for the purpose of construction and vehicle maintenance at the Transit Operations Center. Let's see, this is Mr. Luther.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, council members, staff, and the public. Tonight I'm here on, it says new business, but it's, I don't know, it's kind of old business to me. It's been going, I've been working on it for a long time, but anyway, the item tonight is to authorize the city manager to execute an agreement of purchase, sale, and escrow instructions to buy this piece of property right here to complete the property purchase that's needed to complete the transit operations and fleet maintenance facility that council previously directed staff to work on. So the property includes the purchase of these 4 parcels here It includes the granting of a utility easement for existing utility lines to level 3 communications that are right here. And it includes an access easement in favor of the city out to A Street right over here, I think, yeah. So the purchase agreement is, or the agreed purchase price is $513,888.89, and is recommended to be funded 100% from Proposition 1B Transit Capital funding, and does not require any matching funds from any source, including the general fund. And so staff's recommendation is that council consider and approve authorizing the city manager to execute the agreement on the city's behalf, authorize the city manager to make any changes and or amendments to the agreement which do not substantially affect the terms and conditions of sale and are reasonably necessary to complete the transaction, authorize the city engineer to perform the obligations of the agreement for the city under the escrow, adopt resolution 6102 of Pren's 17 to approve appropriations to provide up to $600,000 of Proposition 1B transit funds to cover the cost, purchase price, and any closing fees that are attributed to the city, or to provide alternate direction to staff. That concludes my presentation. I'm going to try to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, do we have any questions for Mr. Luther from the council? Okay, thank you. We'll open this up for public comment. Seeing no one rise, we're going to close public comment, bring it back to the council. What's your desire? Okay, if no one else is interested, Councilor Vega.
I'll go ahead and make the, I agree. I ask that we authorize this agreement to purchase property. I'd like to make that a proposal for us to move forward with this purchase.
Okay,
Allow the city manager.
Accept staff recommendations?
Yes, sir.
Set number 1 through 4.
1 through 4.
1 through 4.
Second your 1 through 4.
Okay, any discussion? Let's vote. That passes 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Luther. It's been a long time coming. Okay, let's see, we'll go on to number 8. This is revision of handbook and for commissioners, committee, and board members. And this is Ms. Hayden.
Good evening. I'm Stacy Haddon. I'm the city clerk. What you have before you is revisions to the handbook for commission, committee, and board members, as well as of adoption resolution number 6115. You had directed us back in January to bring back, or you directed the Airport Commission, the Beautification Commission, and the Parks and Rec Commission to move all regular meetings to Lompoc City Hall, and allowed the Library Commission, the Senior Commission, and the Youth Commission to continue to hold all regular meetings at their current meeting locations. The Airport Commission has submitted a letter requesting that you allow them to hold their regular meetings at the airport. So tonight, what we'd like you to do is review and discuss the information, as well as adopt Resolution 6115 that will revise the handbook for the commission, committee, and board members to reflect the revisions throughout the handbook and formally accept the changes to the meeting place and times of certain city boards, commissions, and committees, and provide direction on the Airport Commission's request. That's all I have.
Okay, do we have any questions? Councilor Vega.
I think public safety was also included in that.
The handbook already includes public safety.
For the council, okay. And I think one of the comments I wanted to make with concerning commissions and committees, we did respect everybody's wishes for people that we're representing at our meeting, you know, for them staying at their current locations for their own reasons. I think one of my comments for the Airport Commission would be that accessibility was actually brought up to me as an option, And the fact that if you go there, because we were trying to make sure that it was open and accessible to the public, that the doors weren't locked there during the meetings, okay? They have some sort of a combo lockbox thing or something on the door out at the airport where they have their little meetings. And so I just wanted to kind of say, if we're going to end up going along with that recommendation, that the door is,
It's not a recommendation, it's a request from the commission.
well, yeah, I know. Okay, I got you. Okay. And I'm not sure if there's a representative from the Airport Commission here, committee here, again, you know? So one of my comments to the council would be that that if you go there for the public, it's accessible, the door is open, and you don't have to knock and beat on the window to get in. You know, I think that's probably really important. I don't know what any other comments would be. You know, I'd like to respect their wishes, but we wanted to make sure that it was accessible to the public, so that was my comment.
Okay. Councilor Mosby.
I'd like to maybe have the facility that they're holding their meeting in, because they have to be ADA compliant, have that written off as it, because when I attended, I had to sit on an armrest of an old couch. And I don't think that's the facility we want our committees or commissions meeting. Likewise, there's a threshold there that if somebody was in a wheelchair, it'd be very difficult to get over. And I think the ADA ramp maybe needs some adjustments that's there, because the landing on the top is sloped down about 1.5 inches, I think. So that's one of my biggest concerns is I've only attended one meeting there. It wasn't very comfortable. I had to walk over people's legs to get to the back to sit on an armrest. So maybe the meetings can come here until you get back to us and verify that, city manager, on that's okay. That would be my biggest concern, is the ADA compliance aspects of that.
Yeah, I agree with both points that have been made, both by Councilmember Vega and by Councilmember Mosby. We definitely need to ensure that it's not a locked door, and that needs to be open to the public, and it does need to be ADA accessible. So we'll carry that back. Just for the certainty, for the sake of the clerk, would your instruction include adopting the resolution as it reflects the instructions you previously gave in January, plus a conditional, I guess, action on the airports, or would you rather be reported back and decide on the Airport Commission at a later time?
Why don't you bring that back to us at a later time?
Very well.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Mosby.
You got to go to public.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, public comment. Seeing no one rise, we're going to close public comment on this item, bring it back to the council. What's your desire? Councilor Mosby.
Make the motion as per January, as with the city manager added on, to come back if they can find that that's in compliance, and they can bring it back at a later date to shift back in their direction.
So are we accepting everything other than the Airport Commission, or your?
As per January, which was bring everybody here that could come here, which would mean the Airport Commission would come here until that they can verify.
Okay. Do I need a second? Or I need a second on that.
I'll give you a second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Let's vote. That passes 5-0. Okay, we are going on to staff presentations.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council, colleagues, and citizens. I present to you this evening the draft biennial budget for the City of Lompoc for the fiscal years 2017 to 2019. The budget is balanced in its current draft form. However, I must emphasize that dramatic yet achievable actions are necessary in order to balance the budget. I'll highlight those actions momentarily, but first I will summarize the economic issues driving the budget. For the benefit of those in the audience here or watching at home who may not be familiar with municipal finance, allow me to start by quickly explaining about the city's general fund, as we'll be talking about the general fund quite a bit tonight. The general fund tends to be the most critical type of money in any city's budget. Cities have an array of revenue sources, typically 100 or 200 or more. But most of the funds are restricted in one way or another and can be used only for their intended purpose. So for instance, gas tax is collected to improve streets, and it cannot be used to fund a recreational program or anything else other than improving streets. We engage in a great amount of accounting effort to ensure all revenue sources are used for their intended and lawful purposes. The general fund is the most critical type of city revenue because it is used to pay for the city's core fundamental services of police, fire, and parks. If your city has a very healthy general fund, it can also use its general fund as well to take better care of the streets or for any other legal purpose of the city. The three income streams that provide most of the general fund revenue are sales tax, property tax, and hotel tax. You'll sometimes hear it called transient occupancy tax, TOT. I'm going to use hotel tax for ease tonight. First, I'm starting my economic report with good news, and that is that in general, the economy continues to improve statewide. Retail sales are up in most sectors, property values are mostly rising, and employment is dropping. Second, our local economic development efforts are showing success. We can measure that by what is happening with those three income streams that I just mentioned that make up most of our general fund revenue. All three, sales tax, property tax, and hotel tax, are at all-time highs here in Lompoc. And both our local sales tax growth and our hotel tax growth are outpacing statewide growth rates. However, despite successful economic development trends here in Lompoc, we still trail and lag behind other cities here in Santa Barbara County and the adjacent counties. For example, on a per capita basis, Solvang earns about 20 times as much as Lompoc does in hotel tax. Buellton earns about 4 times as much in per capita sales tax. Santa Barbara earns about 5 times as much in per capita property tax. So you can see we are striving to provide the same level of service per capita per person. That is, we have just as many police, firefighters, and acres of developed parks that we want to provide to our citizens on a per capita basis, and yet we have far lower per capita income. That in itself is an ongoing financial struggle for Lompoc. But the 800-pound economic gorilla facing Lompoc and most other California cities and counties is CalPERS, the California Public Employees Retirement System. Thankfully, the California legislature passed effective reforms in 2011 to help ensure that cities can afford and will adequately fund retiree benefits going forward. It stopped most of the bleeding and certainly prevented the outlook from worsening. But it came after decades of underfunding of pension benefits, and the chickens have now come home to roost in the form of this economic gorilla. The decades of underfunding must now be paid over a span of several years, and that is creating a structural budget deficit for Lompoc and for hundreds of other California cities. The CalPERS payback requirements will no doubt drive some California cities into bankruptcy unless they take extremely aggressive action. Lompoc must take extremely aggressive action regarding its general fund, both on the revenue side and the expense side of the budget, in order to have a balanced budget this budget cycle and to retain a balanced budget for future budget cycles. None of these steps are easy. On the revenue side, I recommend, and this draft budget assumes, that we will go to the voters in November 2018 and present 3 tax measures for their consideration. A half-cent sales tax, as many of our other neighboring cities have already done, a 2% increase in hotel tax to 12%, again, as many of our neighboring cities have done, and a 6% utility users tax. If the voters approve, doing so not only balances this budget, but also balances future budgets to address the CalPERS obligation of about $70 million in its entirety. On the expense side, in order to balance this draft budget, I have eliminated all capital expenditures that would have been funded by the general fund, except for the demolition of the old pool building and about $23,000 of other expenditures. But with the adoption of the tax measures that I discussed, capital funds from the general fund will be available again in the next budget cycle to pay for such badly needed items as a fire truck, as police evidence rooms, and park improvements. Also, on the expense side of this draft budget, I have eliminated all general fund support of outside agencies. I realize this is not a popular decision on my part, and I did not arrive at this decision lightly or without lost sleep. The agencies we contribute to do fine and noble work, and this is in no way a reflection of the quality of their work. For this budget cycle, though, I must first ensure that the city's core missions and priorities are funded before that of other agencies. My hope is that with the adoption of the tax measures, the city will be able to, again, consider these contributions on the next and following budget cycles. With that, Lompoc Finance Director Brad Wilkie will now present the highlights of the budget itself, and then he'll be followed by Laura Candy, who will present the capital improvement plan. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Mayor, council members, audience. I have some brief slides to go over some of the items that City Manager Weimiller mentioned in high level. So I'll just get into it. The general fund, as was mentioned, is the primary funding source for anything that does not have restrictions on it. It's sometimes I think of it as the last resort fund as opposed to the general fund, because if it's not something that we have to fund specifically through like gas tax, it falls into this category. So the items that I'm going to cover tonight will be how our core revenues are moving, what our operational budget trends are, what our capital obligations are in spite of the fact that we are recommending very little in this budget cycle. As mentioned, the state pension challenges that we have, and a little bit more detail on the proposed revenue streams, and then a little bit of information about the utilities, balance sheet, operations, and capital programs. I'd like to mention that handing these out on May 2nd is sort of unprecedented, because in every budget that I've been involved in here, it's always been handed out around Memorial Day. So this will give you more time to review the details of the budget, as well as the cost allocation plan, which is also included in the package that will be handed out. So you'll have a lot of information to be able to go through over the next few weeks to be able to drill into some of the questions you may have based on this presentation and questions that come up from looking at the budget book and CIP reports. One of the challenges that we had, we started this budget process in October, and it wasn't until December that the CalPERS board decided to reduce their discount rate, which caused a whole lot of changes that we would have to take a look at and change our direction of how to prepare this budget. Their change from a 7.5% discount rate to a 7% discount rate over 7 years, while having it spread out over 7 years was an accommodation that was brokered by the Department of Finance and various bargaining groups. What it does is it just extends out what it seems like ever-increasing contributions back to CalPERS until we can get over that hump and things start to go back down again, which is far out in the future at this point. When we were standing here doing this budget process in 15-17, CalPERS had also given us a jolt by getting rid of what they called the smoothing process. And they did that also phased in. That was supposed to be phased in over 5 years, where we would get to a plateau and then stay at that plateau for about 20 years. Well, now we have this additional challenge of the discount rate change that's happening right on top of the last 2 years of the first increases, and that will extend it out for another decade or 15 years. So it's a very big challenge. As Patrick mentioned, every agency that is part of CalPERS, not just cities, but 3,000 other agencies will have the same kind of challenges that we have. So we're looking at outside the box, basically, to look for ways that we can accommodate for those fixed costs, because they're one thing that they changed in 15-17 for our safety pooled plan was to differentiate between the payments for current employees from payments to meet our unfunded liability obligation. That requires us to have a lump sum payment to CalPERS for our unfunded liability, regardless of whether we have people that are paying in, current employees paying in the plan. That was extended to our miscellaneous plan for the 17-19 cycle. So we'll have, at some point in time, we'll have an unfunded liability payment to CalPERS in multi-million dollars every single year, in addition to what we have to pay for current employee benefits that are being earned every single year. So, one other challenge that the finance department has is we entered into getting our finance system converted. So we have people in a mix of doing that conversion at the same time that we were working on this process. So it's we've been divided into a couple different major projects so far. So going into some of our major revenue streams within the general fund, Patrick mentioned property tax, sales tax, TOT. We also get what used to be the VLF, the vehicle license fees. That was switched into property tax by the state several years ago, and it grows approximately the same rate as our property taxes do, which is, in hindsight, a good thing for us because we may not have had such growth in the old version of the VLF. One thing we changed this year compared to the last budget cycle is we utilize outside tax specialists to give us their recommendation of what the growth factors were for property tax, sales tax, and the VLF. The rates that you see up there are the annualized increase from the prior year. So property tax and the VLF are approximately 3.5–4% growth, as well as taxable sales. That's growing about 3.5 to 4%. With the new Hilton Gardens Inn, we're expecting the TOT to be quite a bit more than that because of having additional rooms. And that's closer to 8.5%. In total, between the 2 years, we'll be getting about $28,600,000 of money from these revenue streams. That's about $2 million more than what we received in the current tier cycle. So it's a pretty good growth, and it's averaging around a 4% rate. On the expense side, we are a service industry, so a vast majority of what we provide to our citizens and taxpayers is by people. So a big chunk of what we have as obligations is in the form of compensation and benefits. For 17-18, it's about 23.5 million. In 18-19, it's about 24.5. Operational expenses in that same time frame are just a little bit under 10 million a year. What that works out to be is about 70% of the general fund is dedicated to staffing, either salaries, benefits, or pension payments. Leaving about 30 for services, supplies, things like that. On the public safety side, which is a component of the general fund, the net general fund, which is net of all the overhead payments that come in to pay for city manager, payroll, finance, HR, of that net general fund expenses, about 70% of that goes to public safety. And of that 70%, about 77% is for staffing. So we're very much a service industry on all aspects of what we do, both on public safety and everything else that the general fund does, and to similar extents on our utilities, although some have higher proportions of debt service or possibly for the electric utility power purchases that far outweigh some of our staffing obligations. Later on, you'll hear a little bit more about our capital replacement CIP program. We took on an initiative back late last fall to update our plan to be a 15-year plan to be able to go out to the consulting market to get a revised impact fee study. We haven't had one done, and Laura will go through a little bit more. We haven't had one done in about 15 years, so it's the right time to get that renewed and look at all of our impacts and our capital requirements. As mentioned, we are proposing very little in capital requests, either capital outlays or CIP in the budget cycle. The 23,000 that Patrick mentioned had been in our capital outlays. It still is in our capital outlays, but it's such a small dollar amount, we put it into our operational needs instead. The 750 only is there because of the funding that we received from financing to do the pool demolition. The bottom here shows what our CIP program entails for the next 15 years, the first 2 years individually, then the next 3 budget cycles, and then for 5 years past that. In the general fund, we have about $188 million of capital needs that have been identified by staff. If you take out the $58 million, that's about $130 million over the next 3 budget cycles. Moving on to the state pension challenges with CalPERS. As Patrick mentioned, the city has some capacity to be able to mitigate what's going on at the state level. And 3 things that we did back in 2011 were to negotiate second-tier pension plans with our bargaining groups. So with fire, we negotiated a second tier beginning September 24th of 2011. With police and the miscellaneous groups, that was adopted in November 19th of 2011. That established less expensive plans for anybody coming on new to the city. And PEPRA, which came out about a year later, established new plans even more economical for anybody coming in brand new to the CalPERS system beginning January 1st of 2013. The benefit of that is it's going to mitigate over time our costs, but it's going to be over decades as opposed to just being a quick fix. One thing that we are tracking and have been tracking in the weekly update is how many people we have that are employed that are in Tier 2 or Tier 3. The exhibit up there shows you right now, as of the last reporting to CalPERS, who we have between the safety plan and miscellaneous plan in Tier 2 and Tier 3. About 40% of safety is in those secondary tiers, and I think about 31% are in the miscellaneous plan, 36%, which is really good considering when Pepper came out and we were looking at the changes that would accrue, the benefits that would accrue to us, the actuaries that we hired to take a look and see what our actual experience would be, presumed that 50% of the employees would become Tier 2 or Tier 3 employees within 10 years. So we're about 5 years into it, and we have more than 22.5%, which is half the 50. So we're well on our way to getting that transition going. I can't really take any credit for that. Baby boomers are the majority of our workers. They're retiring in droves, and that will help move more people into the secondary tiers. Unfortunately, those retirees are still accruing those benefits that they earned while they were here, and we're paying for those because they're a portion of that, based on those decades of underfunding, are obligations we have that have not been paid on a current basis. So, not to be dark about it, but the benefit of the two new tiers will come to fruition when Tier 1 employees go out of the system, and we all die off, so we're all mortal. So at those points in time, we'll be seeing some benefits. But since most of the plans allow people to retire around 60, we have people that are probably going to be in retirement longer than they were employed. So that's one thing that was not captured in many years of PERS actuarials, was the length of longevity of people once they retired. I bring this up here because the next slide is going to be visually, it will tell you what Patrick was mentioning about many cities having challenges. This is a graph that I compiled based on an actuarial review of our system after we heard from CalPERS with their rate reduction announcement in December. We are right about here, where that little dip is. And this scale is from 2003, 2004, out to 2047, 2048. So it's about 45 years of a graph. So these curves are the anticipated contribution rates that we will have with CalPERS for miscellaneous is in blue and safety is in red. And this based on a percentage of salary, even though a big chunk of what we're paying them is not based on salary. It makes it easier to look at because that's how historically they've always done. They've always looked at our contributions as a percentage of salary. That's how everybody knows it. The change they made was pretty dramatic, but it was there to maintain the health of the system. But as you see, the two peaks out here are in about 2032, 33, and we're in 2017, so that's about 15 years. So we will be seeing increases in our costs for 15 years. When I stood here in doing this presentation for 15-17, everything we understood about the system was we would see a 5-year increase and that would level out. Because of the discount rate change, that whole idea went out the window. And we have to find a way to be able to meet these obligations while also preserving our ability to provide services. As mentioned earlier, that's primarily by bodies. We are a service industry done with people. It's not something we can contract out to outside the states. So these two graphs put it a little bit differently, but it gives you an idea. What we got from our actuary report, I put this into a graph from about 1999 to 27, 28, which is the last year that our actuary gave us dollar amount information for our review. we're right about here now. So these years are all pretty, and this is on a contribution basis on dollars as opposed to percentages of salary. So there are a number of reasons why this is kind of staying flat. We had furloughs for a while, which reduced our obligations. The economy went bad, which also reduced some of our needs. And if you go back, this little dip right here, where I say A, that was caused by what CalPERS used to allow was a fresh start, which basically allowed you to refinance your obligations. So in 2010, which effectively what happened at the beginning of the 2009, 2011 budget cycle, when we had the $5 million deficit that we were trying to make good on, that reduction was a temporary reduction, but it also extended out our payments from 14 years. We had a remainder of 14 years out to 30 years. So that just extended further and kind of reiterates what Patrick mentioned about not paying timely. And that answers a little bit why this kind of a dramatic jump then levels out. But as you can see, from here on out, the projections, because of the flat rate payments for the unfunded liability, that's dramatic and very great increase in our cost. And that's citywide, it's not just the general fund. On the right-hand side is from our projection model, our 10-year projection model as part of the budget for the general fund. So the general fund, we're expecting to have about a $4.5 million payment between the unfunded liability and the normal cost, which is the current costs. And then by 26, 27, it'll be closer to $8.5, $9 million. And that's just out of the general fund. So we're seeing some dramatic increases, which is why Patrick mentioned there needs to be some dramatic and substantial changes in how we look at our revenues and expenses. The model that was part of the 15-17 budget is incorporated in our model for our whole budget. So Dean, our revenue and accounting manager, was able to provide some scenarios, different scenarios of what our 10 years outlook would be for the general fund based on different assumptions. So if we had put our head in the sand and just ignored all the signs of things changing, and we kept our current expenditure levels, didn't change anything to do with our revenue streams, and didn't do anything with capital replacements, this is how we would look on the general fund. This is fund balance dropping every single year. Revenues rise because of just inflation of the various tax revenue streams. The expenses are going up because of expectations in salary growth and the pension and benefit cost increases. And this up here is our 2-month reserve target. So here's where we are, here's where we're going, and that's our target. So that's not sustainable, that's not what we have in the budget. This next slide looks at what we did to get a balanced budget for 17-19, which took a lot of effort, heartache, and sacrifices. If we continue to do those throughout the system without any kind of revenue enhancements besides just organic growth, we would see a drop in our fund balance, but it would slowly level out and start going up in 2026, 27. We still are significantly below our reserve requirement, but revenues and expenses are much, much more in line than they would have been in the status quo model that was before that. So moving on to some other parts of the equation. This is the general fund capital replacement, the CIP for the general fund. And it's kind of lumpy going through because of requests and timing of when the things are that were requested. So the gold bars are what were requested for each individual year. And past the first 2 years, everything is in a 2-year cycle in your CIP book. I just divided those evenly between the 2 years to get an annual amount that's required. The red bars are just an annualized 10-year average of the 10-year requests, which is approximately $13 million, just a little bit less than $13 million a year. Obviously, that's not something that we can entertain right now, and we did not put anything into the budget for the general fund for capital, but it is something that needs to occur either through impact fees or typically impact fees and other revenue streams. So, looking back at some of our revenues, what they looked like going forward, and I did this on purpose because I showed what the revenue stream for property tax, sales tax, TOT, and VLF were for 17-19 in the 2 years. This shows what it is between 17-19 and our projection for 19-21 and 21-23. I did that because I wanted to show that those 4 big revenue streams generate $28 million in 17-19, 30.7 in 19-21, and then $33 million in 21-23. The growths between those, and all of those have annual growths around 3.25%, 3 to 4%. The percentages are on here are 2-year percentages, so they're just so you are clear that you need to divide by 2 to get an annual growth. But the dollar growth between 17-19 and 19-21 is about $2.1 million. And between that 19-21 and 21-23 is about $2.3 million. And that's important because of the next slide. So the next slide shows some of the monetary effects that are from the proposed tax increases. But before I get there, I want to point out that our obligation for the CalPERS pensions will be about $10 million in 17-19, $12 million in 19-21, and $14 million in 21-23. The incremental increases for 19-21 and 21-23, the $2,196,000 exceeds the tax increases that we are anticipating, and the $2,053,000 in the second 2-year budget cycle leaves about $250,000 available for other needs in that year. So looking to our regular growth in taxes will only cover our current CalPERS obligation. It won't allow us to restore any services that are proposed to being cut in 17-19, which is why Patrick mentioned that we will be recommending, and I have in the budget, those 3 tax measures. Because of the timing, the effect on the 17-19 will be fairly modest, of about a $1.3 million increase in taxes in that budget cycle, primarily because of when the collections would begin. They wouldn't begin any sooner than January 1st of 2018.
That should be 2019 for those 3 days.
Yes, you're right, 2019, yep. But then in 19-21 and 21-23, you see a full year effect of all of those, which is about $10 million for each budget cycle, which would allow us to restore our previously cut services and allow for some modest use of our capital plan to fund the capital, but only about a quarter of it. So this is what is in the budget book and takes into account those changes that were mentioned earlier. You see a fairly large growth here in fund balance because of the tax measures. Then, beginning in 2021, I believe, we would have a reserve that we could either utilize or set aside to do some capital improvements of about $30 million out of the $130 million that is in the CIP plan. And it would allow us to restore services that are being dropped as part of the proposed 17-19 budget. This is looking at capital from a citywide perspective. There's $372 million of capital items that have been identified by staff. A fairly large chunk of that is in the 4 big utilities, and a big chunk of it is in the general fund. This slide shows both the capital improvements and the capital outlays that are proposed for the 4 big utilities. These are in the budgets. These are appropriated as long as they're approved for those utilities to begin doing some of the work that is part of their, either part of their rate models or just from their regular CIP program, such as for electric. This is a summary of, I call it sources and uses, but it's, you can also say income and expenses, but it's appropriations and estimated revenues, as well as transfers that are coming into the various funds. You'll see that the general fund has a $46,000 surplus. On a citywide basis is about a $10 million surplus, with total sources of about $260 million and uses of about $250 million. And then each of the utilities is showing roughly somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000 of surpluses, except for solid waste, which will be receiving its $1 million loan proceeds this year or possibly next year that will offset that deficit that it has. So, and that's all I have. I'll let Laura take it from here for the CIP.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Council members, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Laura Candy, and I'm the Administrative Analyst for the city. I'm going to basically just take over where Brad left off and give you a little summary of the capital improvement program that we've been working hard on. This is also referred to as the CIP. And this is the city's capital needs, and culminating with this will be the distribution of the budget, CIP, and a cost allocation plan books. Staff has devoted many hours to gathering information, evaluating the city's needs across all of the different city departments to determine a plan for the city's current needs as well as future ones. The city does have many needs and a substantial amount of deferred items. We'll begin with the summary of the results of our CIP in the PowerPoint slide above. Slide 1 is a summary of the overall totals for the CIP. As you can see, for the 15-year plan, we had 174 projects that are requested, totaling $372 million, roughly. 6-year plan, 142 requested projects, totaling roughly $192 million. In the budget cycle, this current one that we're coming up on, there's 96 requested projects totaling approximately $81 million. And for general fund requested projects out of that same budget cycle, 2-year cycle, it's 59 projects totaling $44 million. This next slide is a breakdown from each of the divisions on how much you can see on each budget year. So the first part here is under our general fund. We have police, fire, parks, recreation, urban forestry, engineering, facilities, library, TAP TV, and those are the totals for fiscal year 17-18 and then fiscal year 18-19. Same follows with internal services of fleet and information technology and communications. And then on the right-hand side, transportation with airport and transit, as well as enterprise utilities of water, electric, wastewater, and solid waste. And the grand totals are listed above. This is just a basic pie chart of what you just saw on the previous slide. It's to kind of give you an idea roughly of the ratios of what is being requested for this budget cycle. And as you can see, the general fund is at 54%, so the largest piece of the pie. 21% for the utilities, 18% for transportation, and 7% for internal services. Our last CIP was approved back in 2002, which led to, of course, our last impact fee study, which was approved back in 2003. So as you can see, these are rather old, over 15 years old. And so we put together this CIP program in hopes that we can go ahead and hire a consultant to basically do our 15-year CIP projects that would be due from any new or expanded developments. Usually when used in conjunction with a sound CIP plan, impact fees can ensure adequate infrastructure to accommodate growth in the city. So the CIP book has detailed descriptions for all projects within the 6-year time frame. For a 15-year summary, the project totals are in the back of the book for your reference. And with this CIP, the projects that are requested and recommended to be deferred, if that's what you choose to do, which is what our recommendation is, they would be deferred in the upcoming budget cycle and will be rolled over to the next 2-year budget cycle for consideration during that budget cycle. And I'm here for any questions.
Questions for either Patrick, Brad, or Laura? Any questions on the presentation? Okay. Well, I'm just going to make a comment. You know, naturally, we're a little shocked, but I have to commend you on the brave moves you're recommending. It's some drastic times, and it looks like drastic measures are necessary. So, I mean, other than that, I really don't know what we can say until we get the manuals and take a look at them. So,
Just to maybe wrap up, yeah, and I realize there's a lot to take in, and we wanted to get it to you this early so you have some time to absorb. There's no anticipation of any action tonight. Naturally, we're here to answer any questions you have now. You probably want to have some things sink in. It's one of those things I'm sure you will have plenty of questions coming up. None of this was arrived at lightly, and I realize those are dramatic proposals that are being made, and as you said, you know, it's that sort of a situation that we're facing. You can see that from the details that Mr. Wilkie had presented on just what we're facing on the expenses with CalPERS.
I do have one request you can make. Obviously, I don't think you'd know the answer right now, but Mr. Patel made the request that we consider additional revenue from the Hilton Garden being set aside for public safety. Sorry? Oh, these are all mine. I was hoping to only get one. So, yeah, I know. So, I mean, just kind of give us a comment on what that would encompass.
Philosophically, I'll start with the philosophical and I'll get to the practical, but philosophically, I cannot agree with any action that would artificially limit what you do with your most precious budget dollars, that being general fund, because we have other things that we have to cover. As a practical matter, as you heard, our general fund expenditure, the public safety, which is where he would like his dollars directed, it is 70 to 80% of the general fund. So as a practical matter, it's a good portion is going to go there, and I could show, well, more than that money is going to public safety. So yeah, no big thing. It's just a matter of, well, do you want to see an accounting detail? But philosophically, again, I would argue vehemently against the notion of limiting your most precious income stream in that manner. I think we have to direct it where it's most needed. And merely the argument that he made about, well, this is all new money and you haven't seen it before, you can see we also have expenses we haven't seen before. So it would be like me suggesting, well, don't spend any money on painting your hotel. You haven't done that before, just send that money to us as well, or send it over to public safety. And I wouldn't suggest that because he has new expenses that go along with his new revenue. We have new expenses that are more than consuming our new revenue. So I appreciate where his heart is, because we definitely need to fund our public safety better than we've done before, and that's hence why I'm making the recommendations I am. But to artificially limit or put handcuffs on ourselves, I wouldn't be able to agree with that as being the best for us to do.
Okay, and then the other question I'd have is, I mean, this is very drastic and a dire situation. Play a little Monday morning quarterback, and I know we briefly touched on it. Some of these things were completely unexpected, but is there anything that past councils or this present council could have done to foresee this and softened it? Because this is...
I can't point a finger of blame, because there was new information, as Mr. Wilkie pointed out. There was dramatic new information as recent as December of this year. I think the past councils, certainly that I've worked with, and what I saw even before my arrival, and with the current council, you are not irresponsible at all in your fiduciary responsibilities. I've seen that you and the past councils have exercised fairly good wisdom and trying to make sure we're covering the basics and understanding that we are not as flush and have as much discretionary spending available like some other communities do. So I think from what I've seen, the actions have been consistent. I generally am usually opposed to, unless we're in really astounding times, I'm generally not one that's going to be supporting like a tax measure. I'd rather find any and all other solutions before we'd get to that one. And so you could say, wow, if you'd done, these increases that we're talking about, if we had proposed those sooner, got them to the voters sooner, the voters had adopted them sooner, we would, mathematically, you'd have more money available now, but I don't think the situation's called for it. It didn't seem to be that drastic, and as we said, I know I got asked when I was interviewing for this position about the idea of running a tax measure, for instance, a public safety tax and the like, and what we had all agreed was that, well, we better do we need to first be about the business of making sure we're collecting and being good stewards of the revenues that we're entitled to before we go out and start examining other revenue streams. And so we've been doing. So I think the council's provided pretty good leadership in that regard. I also want to point out, I realize this places all of you in a difficult situation. It places all of us in a difficult situation. I am not asking the council to approve a tax increase. You couldn't if you wanted to. It's a voter decision. I am asking that you would take to heart the considerations that I have, and ultimately that you'll approve the concept of allowing the voters to decide whether they wish to fund the core services that they're receiving. And while we won't be able to advocate one way or the other on the ballot measure, we certainly can give, I believe, adequate information out there to be able to make to be able to make sure that the electorate is informed in making their decisions.
Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, like you say, we've got a lot of information to look at, but I'm going to throw a few comments out. Between Governor Brown and the gas tax increase, the VLF, which we may receive some trickle down on that, history shows that the people in this community are not going to support tax increases. There's very low confidence in the community on us in managing our money. We just watched a school bond fail. I understand that the school bond is coming back up on the ballot again. If we put a 0.5%, the school board does, that'll put us at almost 9%, one of the highest taxed cities in the county, possibly the state. I just keep looking, especially when they find out that one of the main reasons that we got to raise a tax is to cover retirements, and there's people out that are struggling to buy food. I'm thinking we're going to have a long budget session.
And those are good points. In response to that, a couple of observations. One is, I realize we're talking about retirements, no doubt, but we're talking about retirements that are past and gone by. We could shut down our operations and lay off everyone and discontinue services altogether, and we still have that obligation. We still have that dollar obligation we're talking about. So it's been left for us to deal with. Like it or not, we have inherited this problem. And it's, so going forward, we are able to be structurally balanced if all we had to deal with was the going forward issue. But we also have to resolve this historic issue we inherited, and the only way to resolve that I can see at this moment is to have a tax measure like this run before the voters. I realize in this community maybe that hasn't been, those measures have not been particularly popular. I wasn't around for any of them to be able to give an opinion on what the quality of work was done to educate the public. I don't know. I know that recently communities have been understanding and supportive. It was something like 50, in this most recent November, it was something like 54 out of 56 tax measures on the ballots did pass statewide, tax measures on ballots. And the previous general election, Guadalupe had 3 that they took, and all 3 passed. And it was pivotal to their survival as a city at that point. It got to that point. And so I believe when people consider their, the quality of life and the services in their community that they're looking for and have grown attached to, that they'll look at the facts and make their decisions accordingly. I've seen it be done successfully in nearby communities. Believe it might be able to be possible here, but only the voters would be able to tell us. They won't pass it if we don't give them the opportunity.
The other thing is, Councilmember Starbuck, I agree with your points, but I think it's important that we tried to persuade the electorate that this council, the previous council, actually the previous several councils, have taken actions to show our fiscal responsibility by, you've seen, we've instituted the several tiers in the retirement system. We saw this coming, and that's when we instituted the several tiers. So we have been responsible in that point. We have seen it coming, and we've taken steps to correct it.
Well, I'm going to agree with this, Mayor, but on the other hand, we're asking for people that are not getting a pay raise to pay us more. So, I mean, look at it at the deck plate level here. That's all I'm saying. But till then, I'm not going to, I've got a lot of work to do.
We all do, yes. Councilmember Mosby.
I can see it in your face. I mean, there's a lot of heavy lifting that's out there, there's no doubt. You know, I think it's important when you look at one of the pages that I do share with the public in the CAFR report is the per capita incomes that the people out here have been succumbed to. And in the last 10 years, they're down $100. And I've got to be mindful of that, of what the people are doing without out there. And I know you are. It's going to be a tough one. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. I
Absolutely agree.
did have something to say, but we're not on HBO, so we'll keep that one off.
Okay.
I have something, Bob.
Councilmember Vega.
Patrick, you know, your thought process on the subsidizing of other entities or groups or whatever out of the general fund, I remember you mentioning it before that, I believe you said you thought that, you know, public safety should be, should come out of that general fund, and we had been subsidizing, it's been quite a bit of subsidizing, okay, in Lompoc. I believe you said that before. Maybe you could run across some of that actually is not going to be funded according to this budget.
We have a handful of different agencies that, because they provide services that have collateral benefit to the city, that we've been doing that. So it's not been like and it's not an inappropriate gift of public funds or anything like that. We had our reasons for doing it, but like I say, these are organizations and agencies that they are separate from us. They're not overseen by you, the council, and they have their own boards and the like. And while they do provide collateral services and collateral benefits to the city, as I said, it's not, when I get down to brass tacks and I got a single dollar, do I spend it on our core service or do I give it to somebody else to pay for their core service? I've got to go with the internal. One of the good things about if you were to approve having those three initiatives go before the voters and the voters were to approve and pass those things, it's not a forever thing that we're cutting people away. We get to reconsider them again with the next cycle because, as Mr. Wilkie pointed out, for this budget cycle, it helps us some because the hotel tax, we get about 6 months worth of benefit out of. We get about 3 months of benefit out of a utility user's tax and out of a sales tax. But we have the full 24-month benefit for all three of those for each subsequent budget cycle. So that's why I said I believe it resolves structurally going forward our challenges with CalPERS. Between that and continued economic development, it'll tackle that, and it'll give us the breathing room to be able to, if we consider it that vital, to be able to refund some of those other positions, and also, as I said, to pay for some of the needed capital that we have. We really, we've got 3 fire trucks and 2 of them were out of service at one time this week, so we normally have 2 in service and 1 is a backup, and we were down. We just had an event this week and we were down short, and those sorts of things concern me quite a bit. We've got issues with our police department that we need to invest in to improve property storage and evidence storage and things like that. And I can list a lot of other needs. We're not going to be able to do that this cycle. So going forward, And if we're successful with the voters, then we'll be able to deliver on those things next year. So a lot of this just really focuses and rides on that issue.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Patrick.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, moving on to item number 9, which is council requests. First one is discussion of possible action of council chambers seating arrangements. So if we all recall, several months ago, I think it was in probably September, October, we, based on discussions with a individual, we decided to change our seating arrangements up here and have the staff sit down below. I've asked that to come back to us for a number of reasons. Just to point out that this council chamber was not designed for staff to sit down there. It was designed for staff and council to sit up here. Unlike other council chambers, for instance, the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors. That chamber is designed with, it was built to have the staff down below. This was not. This was built for staff to sit up here. The arrangement is awkward for me as I'm trying to run the meeting. We have the lights up here, and as each of you desire to speak, you turn your light on and I can see who's speaking. If staff wants to speak, they have tiny little lights on their microphones, but I cannot see them from up here. So they have to raise their hands when they want to speak. So it's very awkward for me to run the meeting that way. And this building was built in the I believe in the 60s, late 60s. Late 70s? Okay, 70s, okay. So for, 40 years, no one has complained about this arrangement until just recently. And it happened to be during election time when one individual brought it to our attention, caused a lot of commotion, and got us all concerned about transparency, which it had not been an issue for since, what was it, the 70s. All of a sudden now it becomes an issue. And I really believe it was just an issue because of the campaign going on. When we look at other chambers, the other thing that was they're concerned is that there's an intimidation factor. The 5 of us sitting up here, then the city attorney, the city manager, the individual was stating that a speaker is intimidated by so many people. Well, let me tell you, the Supreme Court has 9 people in black robes. If you want to talk about intimidation, that's probably more intimidation than we have up here. The city of Santa Barbara has 7 council members sitting up there. Is that any more intimidation than we have? The SB-CAG, if you've ever been to an SB-CAG meeting, there are 10 or 11 people sitting up on the dais. There is 1 representative from every city, and there's the Board of Supervisors sitting up there. And then there's not even enough room on the dais, so they do have a couple individuals from the cities sitting down on the designed status, on the tables down there that were built for that. Now, the other thing we decided to change was the speaker's podium. We had moved it to the center really because we tried to get the speakers to address the council. That was the reason it was changed. I have no objection to leaving it over there. It's awkward to have the tables here because when we have presentations or award ceremonies and we want to get pictures, we have to get up, we have to move the tables around for people to get up there. It would be the same thing if we put the podium back here. It's an awkward situation. That just didn't work. So I agree with leaving the podium off to the side. One of the things we quoted as the reason to change this, we quoted in our council handbook, section A7 in the council handbook, that it says that the, let's see, this section does not address seating at the dais. It addresses the arrangement of the council meeting, or the chambers here, but it does not address the seating on the dais. What does address seating on the dais is also in our council handbook, and that is section B47 that states, only council members, designated staff, and others authorized by the presiding officer may sit on the dais. So that section in our council handbook, it is B4.7, addresses sitting on the council dais. It talks specifically about council members, staff, and any others that either myself or the city manager so desires to speak or sit up here. A good example is in 2 weeks, or on 23rd, we're going to have this special meeting on homelessness. One of the persons that will help me run that meeting will be Jeff Schaefer from C3H. He's going to help me run. I may ask him to sit up here, and according to the council handbook, I have every right to do that. But that section talks about the seating on the dais. Council, staff, and designated individuals. The section that we stated when we moved it all said nothing about sitting on the dais or seating on the dais. So for those reasons, I'd like us to reconsider. I'll leave the podium over there, but I'd like us to reconsider staff sitting down there for all the reasons I mentioned. It's awkward for me. It interferes with the flow when we have presentations. It is not talked about in the council handbook about them sitting up there. It talks about them sitting up here. So that's my discussion on this, and I'm hoping you will agree with me, and I'm looking for other discussions on this. No one? Councilmember Osborne.
Having prior to being elected, standing before council, and when it was fully seated with staff here as well, did not find it intimidating. It was much easier to make presentations when I could see all of the faces of the individuals that I was speaking to rather than the backs of the heads of some of the staff. And then conversely, coming on to council and sitting here and at times only seeing the back of certain individuals' heads is disconcerting as part of feeling like conversations are moving forward. So having been before council with the prior setup, I prefer it. I'm more comfortable with it. I don't see it as an intimidation factor or something that the community should find difficult. If they find that difficult, there's bigger problems with us if they're intimidated by us. So again, it shouldn't be about where we're sitting and who's sitting here. We should always be providing an environment that feels welcoming, and it shouldn't come down to who is or isn't sitting up here. So I would be happy to have staff return to the dais and move these tables out of the way, but that's my personal opinion.
Anyone else before we go to the public? Okay, we'll open this up for public comment on this issue. Seeing no one raised, we'll close public comment. We'll bring it back to the council. And I will make the motion that we return to the way we had it prior to our change, allowing staff, certain staff to sit up here, as it's stated in our council handbook, that I do have the authority, or it is stated in there that staff and council members should be sitting up here, can be sitting up here. So I'll make that motion that we go back to that, leaving the dais over to the speaker's podium over to the right, but allowing staff to return to this area. And with that, I'll ask for a second.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Let's vote. Okay, that does not surprise me. Okay. I could
Excuse
pull.
me,
Yes.
Mayor.
That failed, by the way, 3-2. Yes.
Might I ask as an alternative if, it's fine that we don't need to be on the dais, and happy to sit here or in the back, or as I've said before, I'd watch from home if you'd let me. But would you consider, you as a council, consider the possibility that we at least move this configuration? We'll figure something out to put us off on the side I'd really like to be able to have eye contact with all 5 of you if I'm addressing you from here, and I don't have the peripheral vision to take in 2 of the members, and I imagine, I might be speaking on Mr. Pannoni's behalf, but he's probably got similar issues, and we are in the way of the presentation, so if we're not welcome on the dais, are we welcome to at least be able to rearrange the situation so that we can sit over to the side?
Discussion? Councilmember Mosby?
Naturally, the appropriate chair would make it a lot easier as well, but I don't know, I'd be willing to work with the plan down there, but definitely having a chair that you can rotate around. I know in the other chambers where I sit, they have that ability to have a chair that they can swivel and pivot and get into conversation. I know it's difficult where that is. Without a doubt, having the proper light to gather his attention. I know for the mayor, it's even difficult sometimes here. I know Councilmember Starbuck has to get him over here. So something there that on the table as well to better catch the mayor's attention would be appropriate as well.
I was thinking an air horn for that.
A little red siren or something down there.
Yeah. Anyway, if you all wouldn't mind, I thought at least we'd repair the issue of the awkwardness when we've got group presentations to do. And you're right, maybe we'll appropriate some chairs as well. But anyway, the idea of
they're nice, by the way.
Yeah, and I count that there's 4 unused up there.
Imagine
there's
that.
4 down here. That's convenient, but that we'd, with your approval, we'd relocate maybe over to the side.
Well, Councilmember Vega, you're the one that came up with the current design. Would you have an objection to them sitting off to the side?
Mr. Mayor, no, I wouldn't have an objection to them sitting off to the side. That wasn't, the gist of it was because of the public comment prior, and,
The one person?
well, regardless,
Yeah, okay. I just want-
I'm only one vote myself,
Yeah,
okay, so.
Sure.
So, if these other guys are okay with it, you guys are all okay with
Well,
it, I don't mind.
Why don't you make a motion then? Get a second to allow them to sit off the side, and we'll
Yeah,
see if we
I
get...
can make the motion then, okay? If that's what you're asking me to do. I'm fine with that. For them to be able to move their tables to the side in a different configuration, that would be my motion, to allow staff to move the table to the side in a different configuration.
Okay. Any second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Brave as souls, okay. Okay, so it's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Let's vote. And that passes. Okay. So we'll take a break and you guys can move. No, I'm just kidding. We'll do it next time. Okay. Item number 10. Discussion of possible action on Highway 246 corridor safety issues. Councilmember Mosby.
Well, I hope everybody's had time to read the letter from Caltrans. Seems like they're asking for a little help with us, with the county, or they could use a little help prodding the county. In my engagement on Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, realizing that it's not just the Robinson Bridge that's an issue, but it's that whole corridor is dangerous. And those of you know, you see the cross there in this vicinity where there was somebody who did die there within the last several years. But the accidents happen there continuously. I haven't been traveling that road with the executive director of SBCAG during the last big rain, and the water was all the way across and coming from the farmers' fields. So bring this letter forward to you guys, and maybe the city attorney can help with us to see if there's something that we can do to ask the county to assist Caltrans in fixing a dangerous section of that corridor.
Councilmember Vega.
I'm sorry.
Councilmember Starbuck.
So the intent is that we write a letter supporting Caltrans' recommendation to the county? Make sure I'm getting it clear.
Yeah, and it's, asking the county, as it states in here, it says the flooding is a result of a farmer directing agricultural tailwater to state highway in ditches that rapidly aggregate and fill with fine sandy sediment and overbank onto the highway. The farmer has been approached many times by Caltrans maintenance forces to no avail. Caltrans staff have also made numerous requests of the Santa Barbara County to take appropriate action with the responsible property owner. So something that would help prod them along and identify that we received this letter and have the county assist Caltrans to meet.
Okay, I'm going to refer back to our council handbook again. There is an item in the council handbook that says that we should not be taking action on things that do not take place inside our city boundaries, that are not within our jurisdiction. So for that reason, I don't even think we should even be considering this. It's in our council handbook that we do not take action on things outside of our jurisdiction.
And
Councilor
I
Mosby.
think we've taken action on items that directly affect us. The Robinson Bridge is outside our jurisdiction. Actually, sitting as River Park is owned by the city of Lompoc, but it's outside city limits. I think because it affects so many people, so many thousands of people in our community. That whole roundabout area, and you yourself asked me about issues with the roundabout when we had the tragic accident there with the firemen and such. It would directly affects so many thousands of our people. I think it's time for us to step up and fill in. We obviously have made the request several times. In fact, you asked me just a couple months ago to come back with some information about why we don't take money from South Coast Measure A and to advance the movement of Robinson Bridge, which again, Robinson Bridge is outside our jurisdiction, but
It states, in the council handbook, states things that are outside of our jurisdiction that do not have an impact on our community. What impact does water running across 246 have on our community?
well, it's killing our people.
How's it killing? How many people have died because of the water running
Well,
across?
there was a lady about 6-7 years ago who flipped over there. There was 3 bad accidents the last major storm there of our people. One was in one of the farmers' field in a semi-truck, and there was a 2-car there. But that whole corridor has had some serious accidents. So most recently, like I said, that during the last major storm there was 2 cars that were there. I think it's important for our people that it does directly affect our people in the community when we have something like this happening.
Okay, I'm just going to, again, rely on our council handbook that says we should not be taking this action. And Councilor Starbuck, you had brought it up several times, too, about the similar thing, so.
Yeah, I will mention that I was the one that wanted us to stay out of affairs outside of our city, and that's absolutely true, Mayor. I noticed that this does come from the state to the county. I'm kind of in a rock and a hard spot. I'd love to send a letter, but then again, I understand that what our handbook does say, and being the one that put it in there, it would be pretty bad on me to break the rule. But I mean, I think to put teeth in it at the SBCAG meeting somehow would be the ultimate thing here, now that we are aware of it.
Anyone else? Councilor Osborne.
If it actually was more than one, it refers to a single farmer. So it's a single property. It would be making a recommendation to an individual who doesn't reside in our community and wanting action taken on somebody that isn't somebody that we actually have influence over. So I disagree with trying to write something in support. If it was a series of properties and a series of owners that really were creating an impact, but this is by all appearances, is a single individual that's between the county and Caltrans, and it's sad that it causes issues for us, but if it's rain and it's rain issues and it's flooding the road, people should slow down. They know what driving habits you should have during the rain and slow down for deeper water. So I can't support something that goes against our handbook and is towards a single individual.
Councilor Mosby.
Yeah, this isn't to the individual, this is the county to do something about it. So it's not referencing the single individual. It'd be referencing to the county to have them enforce their agricultural grading codes or whatever it might be, but also recognizing that Caltrans has made numerous attempts.
Anyone else? We open this up for public comment. Seeing no one rise, we'll close public comment. Bring it back to the council. Anyone wish to make a motion? So no motion. The item dies. Okay. Moving on to item number 10. No, that's item number 11. Status report from the ad hoc committee regarding marijuana regulations inside the city limits.
May I ask the mayor for the ability to go down to the podium and make the presentation? Thank you.
Absolutely.
As the community is aware, Councilmember Victor Vega and myself were appointed by council to the Ad hoc Cannabis Committee. I'm here to give you an update of how that is going so far, and I'd like to reiterate for the public that the purpose of the Ad hoc Committee is just to acquire information and do the research, listen to the community, listen to the stakeholders, and bring it back to the community. So, just a little background, we've been doing our research and attending conferences and reading materials. So I think the public, it's important to understand the history of cannabis in the U.S. There was medical and industrial use of cannabis until 1937. Post the alcohol prohibition, attitudes changed. There was an individual named Harry Aslinger who worked for the Bureau of Prohibition and Federal Bureau of Narcotics who wanted to see his job continue. So the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was brought about, and yes, that is the correct spelling of the word at the time. This ban was opposed by the American Medical Association. Then there was the Boggs Act of 1951 that added additional restrictions to the growing of hemp and the growing of other related products and manufacturing. Then there was the Narcotics Control Act of 1956, and this is the first time cannabis possession had no stamp tax. It was 2 to 10 years and up to a $20,000 fine. So already you start to see the taxation and the fines and the aggression towards the production of and the industry of. And then there was the Controlled Substance Act of 1970, which put it as a Schedule I classification. Then the legalization of cannabis in the U.S. began mostly with the different rules that were coming into play in a couple of different states, and as a result, the federal mandate became known as the Cole Memo in 2013, where there are 8 criteria to maintain states' rights to control the cannabis legalization. Then there was the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment in 2014, which prevents funding for the DOG or DEA to use arresting or prosecuting patients, caregivers, and businesses that are acting in compliance with state medical marijuana laws. There was the U.S. versus McIntosh in 2016, where the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals reaffirmed the Rohrabacher-Farr Act. And then there's the medical cannabis that is currently legal in 28 states, and it is up for a couple of more currently. Recreational cannabis became legal in Colorado and Washington in 2012, in Alaska, Oregon, and D.C. in 2014, in California, Maine, Massachusetts, and Nevada. So, recent history in California. 1996, we had Prop 215, which authorized medical cannabis use. Then in 2015, the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Acts, which combined 3 bills, now known as MRSA, and provided needed structure and clarity from the 1996 Prop 215. Also allows for local control, and there is new issues coming up with SB 837 of the MCRSA as it's being updated. And then, of course, in 2016, Prop 64, known also as the AUMA, authorized non-medical cannabis use. So where are we with the trends in California? Support levels for legalizing non-medical cannabis was at 52% support in September of 2013, 51% support in October of 2014, and 57% support for AUMA in November 2016. About 3/4 of Californians support medical cannabis today. 53% of those adults say that if recreational cannabis was legalized, they wouldn't be bothered if a store opened in their neighborhood. These are important things to consider. We, as a community, fell right with the 57% support of recreational usage being available in our community. So some of the MCRSA highlights were prevents vertical integration to avoid monopolization of the market, allows for-profit cannabis activity, requires an implementation of seed-to-sale tracking, requires testing with specific requirements, prohibits testing facilities from holding any other license type. Licenses will begin to be issued in 2018. State hopes by the 1st of January, but That is yet to be determined, as they are just released a new set of outlines that are looking for comments in the next 45 days. The Bureau of Medical Cannabis Regulation was created by the Department of Consumer Affairs to help design these regulations, and it allows local taxation and regulatory and licensing fees. So this is all pursuant to Article 11 of the California Constitution. So some of Prop 64 highlights: the adult use recreational title, 57% support, must be 21 years old. Indoor cultivation of 6 plants for personal use allowed. Outdoor cultivation may be prohibited. Adults may possess 28.5 grams of cannabis plant material and 8 grams of concentrate. Allows local taxation and regulation. State excise tax of 15% on commercial, medical, and recreational. State cultivation tax of $9.25 on flower and $2.75 on non-flower plant leaf for commercial, medical, and recreational. This was an interesting tidbit that we came across in our study that I shared the last ad hoc meeting, and I wanted to share again with our community. There was a study released in March by the University of Washington estimating that the entire state's supply of cannabis could be cultivated on 230 acres. In Alberta, Canada, Aurora Cannabis, Inc. just announced the construction of a 14-acre facility that will produce 77 tons of cannabis per year. That's about 2.5 million ounces. To put that production in perspective, in 2015, even in a severe drought, California had 380,000 acres of rice, 430,000 acres of corn, and 918,000 acres of grapes. Granted, much of the cannabis grown is strain-specific, but even assuming a generous 40% of non-flowering plants, the total acreage under production is still much less than most people anticipate or expect. So here's an overview of what the cannabis industry actually is. There are 6 major areas that will be monitored and mandated with different rules and regulations, both from the state and potentially locally. There's retail and delivery. This is the storefront and the ability to have it delivered to your home. There's cultivation, and this is the growing of it, whether it's indoors or outdoors. There's the testing. So this is when the testing facilities are created and monitored to be able to look at what the strains are, if there were different herbicides or pesticides used on them, and rank them as to their ability to reflect what they state that strain is. There is distribution, which is different from delivery. This is predominantly in connection to the larger grow facilities that are then distributing to some of the retail and delivery providers who don't do in-house grow. Then there is the manufacturing. From the manufacturing side, this is actually where the oils are produced for edibles, the oils are produced for topicals, where processing is done for different manufacturing purposes, even if for something like hemp being turned into rope. And then finally, there is the transporting. There is a lot of discussion going on about if there is cultivation in these larger grow houses going on and they need to distribute to the retail and delivery, the transporting of it needs to be monitored and done safely and securely, not only to protect the quality of the plant, but also the security of transporting something that has value and, until it's become normalized, is considered potential for attracting criminal attacks. So there are several different areas that as a community we need to consider when we're putting together our mandate and ordinance. So we have the ordinance. It should be local and unique, but it shouldn't exceed or go beyond what the state is doing as a way to prevent ourselves from getting into trouble. It should address local health and safety priorities. This is where we really are looking for the input from our community, and why it is very much encouraged that if you haven't attended one of our ad hoc public meetings, that you reach out to us via email, phone calls, have coffee with us. We really want to hear your opinion. We need to ensure that state and federal compliance is met with the Cole memo, and we need to consider business sustainability. We don't want to just throw the doors open and say as many as possible, because that isn't necessarily a sustainable business model, and it needs to dovetail well with Prop 64 as it is being fully fleshed out by the state. The typical ordinance elements that we will need to consider and make recommendations and then have staff and legal advice on is taking into consideration all the findings, the purpose and intent of that ordinance, clear definitions, address status of marijuana as illegal under federal law, address the compliance with MCRSA and any other state guidelines for marijuana, have operational requirements in it, prohibited activities, establish permit fees, and distinguish between personal and commercial applications, provide enforcement, and severability. So those first 5 go together and would be in the very first part of our ordinance as part of the introduction and the legal aspects that we are trying to establish. Operational requirements will include things like odor control, disposal, access, security, lighting, those sorts of things. Prohibited activities will include things like what the patient requirements are for those dispensaries and those retails, loitering and blight, and how we are dealing with that regarding what might be some of the fears of the neighborhood. Consumption, where it's consumed, how it's consumed, and what rules we put in as a community to prevent it being publicly consumed. Establish permit fees, distinguishing between personal versus commercial application, enforcement, and severability. This is where we as a city need to make sure that we get total cost recovery, that we analyze what the number of entities of each of these different types of establishments are in our communities so that they are at a level that we can both manage it as we're trying to do enforcement or trying to not overtax our public safety. The next portion is an application process and that processing. So some of the different things that are being utilized by other communities as we've been doing our research is a pre-registration of who is interested in having one of these facilities, whether it's a grow or a distribution or a testing service. An application process by license type preferably. A fixed number versus zoning, so whether or not we're going to say X number of retail services or we're going to say they're allowed in this area but not determine how many are there. And then application process. Are we going to do a first come, first serve? Are we going to do a lottery? There's other options out there. Then there's also the application selection and looking at optimal attributes. Some of those things that we might want to consider, and as we go through the application process, what's established is, are they local? Do they have prior experience? Where's their location? What's their size? Are they financially viable, and do they have a solid business plan? And then many other things. So these will all need to be considered as part of our ordinance and then the process. Then cost recovery. For our community, this is first and foremost very important to me. I don't want our community to get into a situation where we think there is revenue on the table, but that revenue is actually costing us because we have not provided quality cost recovery for our community. So we need to make sure that we have full cost recovery for all of our costs: staffing, processing, reviewing, inspection, background checks, video monitoring, whatever those ordinance requirements are, and our enforcement of them and our ability to make sure that they're done properly. We need to recover the costs. We need to conduct a Prop 26 compliant fee study, and then we need to consider collecting application fees, conditional use permit fees if we go that route, regulatory fees, renewal fees, and annual business license fees. Then there is the taxation. This is, of course, where we see the revenue for the community, and as we heard earlier this evening, we need to look for new sources of revenue. So this would typically go into general fund from the retail, cultivation, and manufacturing. Will require a ballot tax measure. If we were to do it in an off year, a non-election year, it would be a special tax and require the 66.6 threshold. If we were to do it in, say, November of 2018, then it's a general tax and only requires the 50% threshold. The tax methodologies could range from gross receipts, square footage, inventory rate, or others. And then there's collection issues. Some of the collection issues to consider is currently it's a cash-only business. So we need to be able to collect large amounts of cash and process it. And one of those side issues is that the cash smells and has a strong odor to it. So some communities have actually set up completely different collection rooms with their own circulatory HVAC system in order to keep the smell from affecting other employees. How much taxation? So typically the BOE sales tax is 8 to 9.5%. The AUMA has a 15% on gross receipts. The AUMA requires also the $9.25 an ounce on flowers and the $2.75 an ounce on non-flower plant leaves. And then local taxes are ranging anywhere from 5 to 20%. So it's about 25 to 40% taxation. And a lot of communities that are moving forward with these are landing in the range of 7 to 10% on their local taxes. And the rule of thumb and much of the research for revenue formula is based upon statewide empirical analysis when looking at other states that have been doing this and other communities that predict annual generated general fund revenue. So you take the agency's population and you multiply it times the $10 to $20 range. So an example is a city of 100,000 might have an annual tax of $1 million to $2 million. And finally, there's the monitoring and compliance. So we'll need to be able to inspect financial records, track and trace verification of where the product's coming from and is it properly being documented, being able to randomly test products. So who's the testing facility in our area, how are they permitted, and are they doing a quality job? Being able to randomly inspect the labeling. So labeling is required for any of the products sold from the dispensaries and the retails. And so being able to randomly inspect that they're doing that properly. Inspect the premises, make sure they're secure. Potentially require video monitoring. That impacts us and our public safety for our police department to be able to receive that video monitoring, and how is that set up and where does the funding come for that. Dealing with the community and the communications with them regarding complaints, violation reports, and answering any questions. So there's a lot that goes into making sure we set up a process that we can both enforce as well as cost recover while doing these things. So our next steps as the ad hoc, we're working on a survey. For those of you who haven't been able to make a public meeting, we will put a survey together and get it up on the website and share it with the community. The next public meeting regarding solely recreational marijuana discussion and access to it will be on May 18th here in the City Council chambers at 6:30. We're working on our stakeholder meetings. So some of those meetings have been internally, sitting down with Public Works and Finance and Public Safety and getting a feel for their concerns and what they're going to need to address. And then externally, talking to the public schools, the churches, and other business leaders that these businesses might be near and impact. And then as an ad hoc, Councilmember Vega and I will return to council with recommendations from all of this research. And then hopefully council will be providing directives to staff regarding the legal, building, planning, financing, and everything to build the ordinance. So that's where we're at. I see the next ad hoc on May 18th is our last public meeting, and being able to bring something back to council in June sometime. So I'm available for questions from my fellow council members or from the community.
Yeah. You may want to just stay there, Janelle.
Okay.
Just a question. Is my understanding, maybe Joe, you can tune in on this too, if we don't have something on the books by January, then the state ordinance takes over. Is that correct?
I'll let our legal counsel confirm my thoughts.
Currently, recreational medical marijuana are prohibited in the city of Lompoc, and Prop 64 didn't change that. The only thing that will be changed is a person can grow up to 6 plants inside or outside their residence now, and that will continue. But unless the council does something, both medical and recreational marijuana is not going to be treated any differently than it did before Prop 64, except for that point that I just made about the personal growth. And people can carry a certain amount with them, but we didn't prohibit that anyway.
So we're not recommending that we possibly come up with some sort of an urgency ordinance just to put us on the books as saying that, for instance, County of Santa Barbara has just said that marijuana use is outlawed in the County of Santa Barbara.
You already have that.
That's for
marijuana, period.
So that suffices for the state. So the state can't come in and tell us whatever they say we're going to end up doing.
Correct. Not currently under Prop 64.
Okay, that's good. So you come back to us possibly in June then?
My goal, it's our goal.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Public comment? Okay. This was informational only. We don't need to vote on this. Written communication.
Nothing.
Okay, oral communication. This is your last opportunity to speak to us for up to 2 minutes.
Will Schuyler, I live in Lompoc. Thank Mr. Mosby for bringing up the subject of the road down there. A lot of you don't realize that Lompoc could become an island real easy. We lose our 3 bridges and the railroad, we're screwed. We can't go anyplace. So I do think the road and problems with the road out there affect this community. Because if you shut off the outside world, then the airport's the only way you'll have of getting in and out of Lompoc if there's a major disaster. But anyway, the other thing that bothered me is we have the general plan. That says kind of what we want to do in Lompoc, and we're kind of left alone on that. The county says, okay, you got a general plan. And then we have an urban limit line that tells where we want to go in the future, some of it in the county, some of it's in the city. But there are always kind of a little gray area right where the lines are. So there was a thing called sphere of influence that come in. And it's an agreement between cities and counties and the state that if something's happening in your area that is starting in your town, that you would let them know and stuff. So I'd like to know if our sphere of influence does include that road out there. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one else, we're going to close our communication, and let's see, we'll come back to council requests, comments, and meeting reports. We'll start with Councilmember Mosby.
Just report that on April 20th, I went to Santa Barbara County Association of Governments meeting representing the city. Also on April 25th, Councilmember Vega and myself had the ad hoc meeting on transparency, and I also represented the city at no cost to the city, Santa Barbara County School Board Association annual dinner. Learned a lot about dashboards, so I stepped in and helped out for the mayor on that one.
I appreciate that.
I have no reports.
Okay, Councilmember Vega.
No reports except one comment here on the agenda. We added, with the addition of the master calendar, I'd like to thank staff and Stacy, and I think it looks pretty good, and it's more information for the public, as far as letting them know when the committee and commission meetings are. So thank you.
Councilmember Osborne.
I just want to report that I attended the NCPA conference in DC along with Mayor Lingle last week on behalf of Lompoc, and the city did pay for my trip.
Okay, on for April 19th and 20th, I attended a Northern California Power Association meeting in Roseville, and the city paid for my mileage. I used my own vehicle, and they paid one night's hotel. Also on the 19th, I attended the Elks Public Safety Awards, which I had mentioned earlier, and 2 of our public safety officers received awards that night. On April 22nd through the 27th, also with Councilman Osborne, I attended the Northern California NCPA meeting in Washington, D.C., and my expenses were covered by NCPA. On 4/28, I attended the League of California Cities meeting with Councilmember Osborne and City Manager, and the city did pay $35 for my dinner. I paid for my wife's dinner. And that is all I have. I just have a question, though, for staff, and I don't need a report on this, just if you can look into this. It is my understanding that Governor Brown has declared that the drought is over, and he has lifted the restriction, or telling the cities that we have to limit our use of water. So I know we have not done anything yet to lift our restrictions. And the reason I bring this up, there was at least one of the homeowners association, property owner in the homeowners association, said that the property owners are still receiving fines from the association for their browning lawns. So if you just look into whether, I understand that Santa Barbara County is still in a drought, so we may not want to lift our restrictions yet. But if you could just maybe look into that, and you don't have to report back to us, just look into it.
If I could respond with
Sure,
that.
yes.
In the last week's city manager report, there's the map in there showing that we are still in a level of that, so you can see that. I think it's page, 18 or 19 in the report, Bob, out here.
Yeah, I mean,
coordinate
Santa Barbara
together.
County is, I think, the only county still in the state, still in a drought, so. But the governor did lift it, so. And as we all know, Lompoc I mean, we didn't really have I mean, yes, we had a drought, but we had plenty of water. But who knows when the next drought is going to come and how long it's going to last. So if we want to stick with our restrictions, it's going to be okay. And that is all I have. If there's anything else from the council? If there's not, this meeting is adjourned to a regular city council meeting at 6:30 PM on May 16th. Thank you and good night.